without a secure meat space, we have no secure cyberspace. If you have, like, you sit in front of your laptop and you want to, create a new Bitcoin wallet, what you do, you write down your 12 words, right? Or at least you show them on the screen or something like this. Well, what if there is a surveillance camera right behind you and filming you as you see those 12 words? The encryption is gone, right? Because you have shared your private key.
Hello, I am Cody Allingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I catch up with Max Hillebrand, a Bitcoin builder, educator, and privacy advocate. Max has contributed to open source Bitcoin projects, including BISQ, JoinMarket, and Wasabi Wallet, while also talking about individual freedom and self-sovereignty. We dive straight into the concept of the second realm, which is focused on building parallel economic systems in which sovereign individuals are empowered to pursue life, liberty, and happiness without the harassment of the state. Along the way, we discuss anarchy, agorism, praxeology, and natural law. Max is a wealth of knowledge, and I enjoyed this conversation with him. I hope you do too. If you would like to support my work and growing this show, please consider tipping some Bitcoin to the show's wallet. Otherwise, leave a review or comment on your favorite podcasting app. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. How have you been, Max?
Yeah, good, man. Enjoying life, enjoying the summer. Lots of traveling with my truck and being in the woods. So that's always fun.
A cabin in the woods, man, can't beat it.
Exactly.
And it's certainly, it's been a hot summer over here as well. I just went out to do another interview today, just in person with somebody, and I was it was a 10-minute walk from the station, but man, it melted me. No, things have been good. I've actually been reading through some of the material on your website, Max, Towards Liberty. It's really quite a comprehensive set of resources you've got there around Bitcoin, freedom technology, liberty, these kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. That was like a project a couple years ago to kind of have a place that I can link people to for all the interesting stuff that might be interesting to read. And I haven't really kept it much up to date, but actually right now I'm in the process of redesigning it as well.
Yeah.
Putting a bunch more content on it and a better search function and such.
Yeah.
So yeah, depending on how fast I get through with this, but couple months or so, and we should have something a bit more pretty.
Yeah. In terms of that project, how did you come about starting to work on Towards Liberty? How did you start wanting to sort of bring these resources together?
That's a really great question. I guess I realized that there's a moral obligation to share knowledge as such, right? Specifically, knowledge that is critical for the liberation of humans. If we don't spread this widely, then it seems we're not really doing as great as we could be. And so for me, it was always quite important to be active in spreading the gospel, so to say, of this. And then at least have this info available, right? And because I realized also soon that many people just don't really care or are not interested that much into these topics. But some few people are, and then they should have this information more easily reachable. And so that was the main motivation, just spreading the word.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think in a sense that's, having met with you and talking about these things, it really stood out to me that not everybody gets it. They don't have the vision to see what we see. And then secondly, just the sheer importance of these topics. And in particular, I want to point out a piece called The Second Realm, which is by a group, Smuggler, XYC, etc. There's a few people who worked on that piece, but I was reading that recently, and there's this concept of focusing on creating a second economic realm with a sound monetary economy powering it, and where sovereign individuals can collaborate and work together in a free market. And I read through the paper, and it really stood out to me as such a profound idea and so inspiring, yet it's very rarely, if ever, spoken about in the mainstream discourse. And so I thought we could start, if it's okay, maybe talking a little bit about this second realm concept, because it seems very relevant for what Bitcoiners are doing and where we're looking at moving.
Yeah, absolutely. Second realm was a a really, really foundationally important piece of writing for me.
Mm.
And thankfully, I discovered it very early in my Bitcoin rabbit hole journey. And especially like I've reread it many, many times throughout the last couple of years and also recently. And it's just, yeah, it's rare to find a book that is so well honest and but still interesting and useful and applicable. All of this together on many levels, right? For just living with other people or working with them or for them and building stuff and just strategizing ultimately on how to live a free life. A really, really advanced, sophisticated anarchist literature. It stands on top of the shoulders of giants, right? Because it can just assume things like, you know, the non-aggression principle, etc., as super important, and then lay out a strategy that that adheres to it without having to justify it. You know, it just says, well, obviously we need to have a strategy for liberty that does not harm peaceful individuals, right? Because if we start messing with peaceful people, then we'll end up with, you know, in a bunch of trouble. So that's a key pillar of the second realm strategy to just not steal. And it's so refreshing. You know, the book starts out by just saying, oh yeah, by the way, this is the groundworks, right? So obviously we go on from here.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really hit me hard.
Yeah.
It's an extremely useful book.
Yeah. And you would call that concept natural law, this idea of do not steal, do not kill, these kinds of things?
Yeah, exactly. So natural law, I would define as non-man-made, immutable conditions that govern the consequences and of the reality that we're living in, right? So it's almost like an observable thing, right? There is a reality around us, and we can, you know, adhere to the basics and laws and reality itself, or we can try to ignore it and walk in another direction. But usually, if you try to defy reality and ignore it, well, you fall off the cliff instead of flying. And so natural law is obviously here in, let's say, the physical realm, you know, physics, chemistry, biology, all of these are natural phenomena that we see. But I would argue that we equally have certain natural laws in the consequences of human action, so to say, and how do humans, you know, act and why and what is the consequences thereof. Out of these building blocks, we can actually draw a clear law, like a causal relationship, right? A relation between as one thing increases, the other increases, right? This type of phenomena, and I think the gist of natural law on the moral sense is as morality increases, freedom increases. As morality decreases, freedom decreases. That's the natural law, the causality of how to achieve a free and prosperous life is to live a moral life. And I think that we cannot have freedom without an underlying morals. It seems impossible to me. And I guess the reason why it feels that humanity is under such a lack of freedom, such a large extent of slavery, I would argue, is because the average morality of humans is simply extremely underdeveloped. Morality worse than that of a child, right? And that is, I think, the aspect that needs to be addressed and reconsidered in humanity if we want to have a good shot at living a freer life.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're going deep straight into it. And I guess, though, I am conscious that, I mean, zooming out a little bit, we started talking about the second realm, but there's probably just a few things that surround the entranceway to that rabbit hole, including the concept of anarchy, agorism, these kind of concepts that maybe begin that project. So, and perhaps we could start with anarchy, because I think this is often misunderstood, and I'm sure you've had to explain this to many people, so I apologize. But how do we understand the concept of anarchy, and what are the misconceptions of it, and what does it actually mean?
Yeah, anarchy is such a fascinating word to analyze because it shows you of how utterly confused humans are in terms of morality, right? Because if you ask the average human, like, what is anarchy? It's chaos, it's lawlessness, it's fire and burning stuff, right? But if you look at the etymology of anarchy and how it was created as a word with the meaning that it intended, it is the prefix an, meaning without, and the suffix archon, meaning ruler, king. So literally, anarchy means a state without rulers, without kings, right? Where we, and so that's freedom, right? If we don't have slave masters, you're not a slave. You're a free human being. And so the fact that so many people see anarchy as this chaos, this hell, right, shows you that it's literally the inverted meaning, right? It's not just a little bit twisted. It's 180 degrees spun around on its head. And that's just fascinating. When people perceive or think that the act of not being ruled by someone else is chaos and hell and violence, then you see how confused humans are in terms of morality. And well, then obviously they cannot be free because they don't even know what true freedom is.
Okay, I want to pull on that morality thread in a moment, but would you say, though, one way of looking at anarchy would be the idea of rules without rulers? Do you think that's an accurate way to describe it, perhaps?
Yes, I would say so. And then the natural law philosopher would arguably say that there's only one rule, right? And the rule is don't steal. And with that in and of itself, we can build a quite substantial ethics, right, of how we ought to work together and live together.
And obviously, do not steal would encapsulate also do not steal someone's life, etc. So it kind of goes into covering a lot of those bases as well, right?
Yeah, here Rothbard is fantastic in basically saying that any harm is a violation of private property right? And all the traditional evil acts that can be done, murder, assault, theft, rape, trespassing, coercion, and such. These are all the act of one person doing something that violates the right of someone else. Right? So that is another thing that people don't really know, or don't really commonly think of this way. It's like, what is a right to do, and what is a wrong right to do? And human rights are defined in all types of ways. Like you have to. Nowadays, also there's 30 or 50 human rights in the UN Charter, etc., including such things as the right to healthcare and the right to a decent school and the right to a golden helicopter, right? And these are all like rights that other people have to give you in order for you to be a whole, justified human being. And I think that's a complete wrong way of looking at it. Again, I think it's much more pragmatic to look at this in the apathetic, meaning a right is that which you like to define something by the exclusion of it, right? So a right is any action that does not harm the rights of some other sentient being. And so your right is everything as long as you don't harm others. Simple, right? This gives a much more simple and holistic and applicable definition of what a human right is.
And while we're at the stage of just getting some definitions out for anarchy, can we also just quickly talk about agorism and what that means as a sort of a sister concept, please?
Yeah, agorism has kind of three, or the founder of the agoristic idea had three main pillars, and that was anarchy, that was the agora, and that is action. And so anarchy, again, a state of peaceful coexistence. The agora come again from the Greek, meaning marketplace or place of living together, a meeting place, right? So here it's not just where we trade with others and buy things, goods and services, but it's also where we just live together and exchange news and ideas and help each other. And then the third is action. And so not just to sit on your couch and philosophize about the grand ideas of liberty, but to go out and live a free and unashamed life. This is a very powerful addition to the concept, because when humans act, it's like a self-enforcing momentum builds up, where with every action we actually realize that yes, I was able to perform this act freely, and now you can move on. So it's a experiential knowledge that we gather that anarchy and freedom is the correct way of life. And that's, I think, why it makes agorism a very interesting philosophy to just try out for some time, because you actually can, by being helpful to others and trading with them, and you will very, very soon realize by experience, by firsthand knowledge, that this is a correct way of life, a useful way of life. And that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's really interesting because this sort of aligns with sort of, I've often talked about Plato's Republic, and the opening line is set in the Agora of Athens down at the Piraeus, the cosmopolitan ocean port where traders from all over the Mediterranean came and people shared ideas and products and things. And at that stage of history, as you know, there was, not the same degree of government interference. And so things were very much a free port. You could trade and meet new people, and ideas, moved back and forth. And there's perhaps a connection with the emergence of philosophy and Western philosophy in particular from that period. And so I think it is quite fitting that the agora is also referenced here in this project, this philosophy.
Yeah, definitely. I think we owe a lot to the Greeks, obviously. And one way that I've found recently nice to look at is basically the Greeks were the first that had a mythos where humans could actually interact with the gods, right? You could go to Mount Olympus, right? And you could not just see and be with the gods, you could even beat them in some senses, right? So this really put the human individual on a pedestal of realizing our godliness in the sense that we are miracle creatures and have immense power to transform ourselves and transform others and transform the outer world and make it in our own image. This is an incredible gift that humans have. And I think the Greeks were one of the first cultures to really put the finger on this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we've talked about anarchy, but the other A that you had there, action, it certainly aligns with a couple of, again, Greek concepts. You have praxis and that concept of doing, and then you also have techne, the specialization of technical skills and the honing of the craft, the focus on what it is that you do. And that obviously leads us into praxeology as well, which again, just on a definitional level, that's another related concept here, just sitting at the edge of the rabbit hole before we go in. But how would you describe praxeology in this context?
Yeah, praxeology quite literally means the logic of human action. So what can we say a priori by the fact that humans exist, right? That we're real and we behave in certain ways, right? We are in a certain way, and so what is the right way of thinking about humans, basically, specifically in the sense of trade, right? Of economics. Why do humans work, right? Why do we use money? Why is there an interest rate, right? Why are there loan contracts and such? All of these are quite odd things, right? Well, why are humans such a social species, and why do we seemingly achieve so much, right? Well, that is, I guess, the science of economics. And for a long time, humans didn't really know what was going on there, I think, right? At least if you look at the historical records of how people were thinking about things like money or trade, there was really a big lack of understanding and appreciation of what this actually is. And I think recently with the Industrial Revolution and such, we really understood that economizing our resources properly, meaning to try to spend less than to create more than we consume, basically, is super important, because if we are richer, then life is way better. And so the question is, how do we get rich, right? How do we solve many problems at once? And then people really started to think about economics as a science. And there were many ways of thought, including Aristotle, that were horrendously wrong, that were really foundationally wrong. For example, one of the big problems of Aristotle was that he said that when we trade, 4 eggs for 3 bushels of wheat, then this means that the 4 eggs and the 3 bushels of wheat are of the same value, right? We've just achieved this value parity of 2 things, right? And then we can do math on top of our values, right? And we say, okay, this is 2 times as valuable as the other thing and such. This was a very prevailing way of thought about economics. And it doesn't sound that bad, right? But it really fails on a couple important explanations of how this thing expresses itself. And in the late 1800s, we had, especially in Austria, a group of thinkers. Austria was a fascinating time, especially Vienna, where just a lot of bright minds were thinking and researching, and it was really an intellectual powerhouse there. And there were a couple philosophers, mathematicians and such that got together and really started to think about value. And first and foremost here was Karl Menger, who was touted as the founder of the Austrian school, or which later comes to be known as praxeology. And he's basically saying that when we watch two people trade, this does specifically not mean that the two goods have the same value, because that doesn't make sense. Why would you trade something that's exactly the same value as something else? No, the answer is that value is subjective. Right? That value is at the heart of the human, because one human has a specific set of problems, and maybe this good solves exactly his difficult set of problems, while another human has a different set of problems, and this good doesn't really address his, right? But another good might solve his problem. So when we have a trade of eggs versus wheat, then it means that one person values the other good more than his own, and the second person, again, values the good from the other person. That's why you want to have the good that the other person has, because it's better for you. So by having an exchange, we in fact see that it is not the equal value of these two things. The value is in the heart and mind of the individual, and these are two different individuals, and therefore two goods will have two different values for each of these individuals. And the beautiful thing of exchange is that before the trade, people see that the other guy has something that I like more than the stuff that I have. Right? So we're currently in a state of uneasiness, right? Maybe a bit of envious here. Oh, this guy has something cool that I would like. And after the trade, right, we see that now everyone has the thing that he likes most. Right? We've increased the value judgment of both individuals. Look at how fucking powerful this is, right?
Yeah.
Simply by trading, two humans are better off than before.
Yeah.
We've created the value of two people. Like, we've increased it substantially at the same time. Nobody had to give up anything here, right? Both of them got the thing that they actually wanted more. Nobody is worse off. This is a pure win-win game where we humans create value out of nothing, out of fucking nothing, right?
Yeah.
We just make it up. And we're these miracle machines of production that create stuff that is useful and beautiful and delightful. And when we keep doing that, and when we build systems of life that do not crush us for the beautiful ability that we have, then the outcome is an insane amount of wealth, an insane amount of problems resolved, and beautiful things created. And that's a fantastic mode of thinking about what's the role of humanity on this planet Earth. And I guess that's what praxeology is fundamentally all about.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I guess, I mean, looking at the history of Aristotle and these other people, Adam Smith, others who sort of looked at the field of economics, and again, another Greek word there for us, but I guess it's interesting that there was an evolution, there was a development of that school of thought, and just like medicine and other sciences, it has developed over time and certainly found its form in Austria in the 19th century. And I was just in Vienna last month, and it was really quite a profound city, as you know, Max. It's a city of gold. It's perhaps one of the most beautiful cities in the world, in fact, because it was a city built upon this kind of intellectual curiosity, upon sound money as well, and just sort of a confluence of history. And it was interesting that, you know, that role of sound money comes up. I've been listening to the audiobook of A Theory of Money and Credit. As you know, Mises is sort of a disciple of Karl Menger's work, and understanding, you know, what is money and these concepts. Obviously, Bitcoiners, I think, generally have a bit of an idea of some of these theories, but isn't it not an anomaly of history that this idea, this concept, the science of economics has not taken over as the dominant school of thought? Like, why is it that this is not referenced, that most people don't know who Karl Menger is, or who the Austrian school of economics are? Like, what are your thoughts on why that hasn't become accepted science?
That's a great question, and one obvious answer out of many is that the slave masters would like to keep their slaves, and when people realize that they are in fact slaves and that very much they can do something about that and live a freer life, well, that means the slave master loses all his capital, and they have a substantial incentive to make sure that that doesn't happen. And this is nothing new, right? This is something that Mises even wrote about, because in that time during Vienna, there were a lot of great individualist thinkers, right? Like Menger, Mises, von Böhmberg, Sigmund Freud, right? All of these great, incredibly intelligent and kind men. But then there's also what's known as the intellectual bodyguard of the House of Hohenzollern. That's how Mises put it, right? It was basically the elite academia that could invent 1,001 reasons why slavery is good, right? Or specifically why the monarchy is good, right? Why we need to have a centralized ruler to oversee over lots of things, right? And now, sure, there are good arguments to be made here and very interesting ones, but ultimately, the people who paid the bill for the universities, for the academia, for the intellectuals were the kings, right? And they paid them obviously a lot of money because they knew that if the populace would understand their own freedom and dignity, then they would stop being slaves, most, or maybe not all of them, but at least a large percentage of them. And that's dangerous, right? So we've always seen industrial or governmental censorship of freedom thinkers, right? That happened, of course, with Ludwig von Mises. You know, the Nazis tried to hunt him and kill him. They burned all of his notes and books, or well, burned and kidnapped some of them. Actually, later some of his writings were found again, then in Soviet Russian hands. And you know, the same, for example, Murray Rothbard. He was kicked out of the Las Vegas University many times, or he was kicked out of many universities, including the Las Vegas one. That's how I should say it. Hans Hermann Hoppe as well, right? I mean, like, we know nowadays how extreme shadow banning and just censorship can be on an intellectual level, and that has very, very, very much happened, and especially in the realms of academia, where there is such an unreasonable overreach of government funding and bureaucracy. These types of attacks are, just very efficient. It's sad to think about all of the beautiful ideas that were created by individuals who just went against the stream and maybe questioned some of the authoritarian axioms that many humans have. And and these beautiful ideas just get annihilated, kicked out, scorched at the root, so that this evil system of slavery can continue. It's a sad state of affair, but it's understandable. And well, that's why we're trying very hard to work on censorship-resistant speech and trade protocols.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Max. And, you know, I feel like now we've got the stuff that we need to go down into that rabbit hole to descend into the second realm, because without the right equipment, it is challenging to, explore this space. But coming back to this article, and I think there's a few other pieces that go along with it. I think we can start to look at how there is a second realm already emerging today. And I certainly think when we met in Prague, I got a sense that the Bitcoin community is part of that. It's this system that lives within the existing society, or the statist society, where we don't have our own nation. We don't have our own country that we can retreat to. We live amongst the state and the existing system, yet we can create our own second realm where we are, how would you say, less susceptible to the coercion of the state. So I'm keen to just talk a bit more about that, and in particular how it relates to Bitcoin and freedom technology. So, I mean, how would you describe that, like the second realm, but in the context of nation states and where we are today?
Yeah, this is yet another quite old idea, and it was probably started to be popularized under the communist occupation of Czechoslovakia during the Cold War, where there were harsh censorship. You were mandated to be part of the Communist Party. You needed to have big supporting socialism signs in the windows of your business. You had to send your kids to the propaganda regime and, to the youth brainwashing programs, etc. And if you didn't do that, straight to jail, right? To gulag, and not just you, but your children, your wife, and your grandma as well. So there was an extreme level of authoritarianism, a extreme level of surveillance, right, and extreme level of just cultural, well, aggressiveness, let's say. So what can you do if you're a freedom-loving, reasonable human being that does not want to be a slave? So either you can go out in all outright rebellion. Well, at that time, the authoritarian regime was so overpowering that a coordinated resistance by one individual or a small group of them was extremely likely to fail. Like if you just go on the streets and say, fuck Stalin, this is nonsense, stop doing it, right? You get shot. And that happened not just to one person, it happened to millions of people in that time, right? So outright rebellion was not an option. But of course, so one other option is giving up, living complicit as a slave, not thinking for yourself anymore and just do as you're told. That's such a heart-crushing, soul-crushing experience that, yes, many people go down that dreadful and hellish road, but for many, it's just unacceptable. And then what do you do, right? The both extremes don't work. So you need to find a way in the middle. And that is to have a public face that is in the first realm, right? You are a proud member of the Communist Party, right? Stalin is great. I love him. Best guy. And you have all of the signs out. You do everything that the party wants you to do, right? That's your first realm. And again, you have a gun to your head. These are criminals and thugs and thieves trying to rape you and your children. Like, you do whatever is necessary to protect you, right? Okay. But then simultaneously, you realize that you are not a slave, right? You might be under duress and under a substantial one, but you are not a slave, and you can still choose and act freely as you see fit. You just have to be smart about doing this, right? So instead of preaching outside on the marketplace on why free trade is a great idea, instead you make a speakeasy, right? You hide in the underground basement, and you get your friends together, and you read books of literature, and you talk about reason and faith and love, all the things that the powers to be don't want you to talk about. You still do it, but you do it hidden, and in a way that they cannot find you, in the way that they cannot coerce you because you are doing this. And this gives you two things, right? For one, it actually gives you like freedom. In reality, like you're here in the basement talking and drinking with your friends. It's something that is not allowed, but you're still doing it, right? So there's this recognition of your dignity as a human being is reenacted, right? Because you don't live in fear and subservience. You're actually here speaking and having fun with your friends. And so this is the first important aspect of it. And then the second is like, you teach this to your kids, right? You actually build that community, that surroundings that is eventually needed to destroy this tyranny, right? Because that was, of course, still ultimately the long run goal. Like, we have to abolish slavery. That's just has to be done, right? Sooner or later. On the path to that, many people will die because they will be shot by the slave masters. But we have to be smart in between and still do the best progress that we can to ultimate human liberation.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I guess it's interesting what you're describing sort of sounds a bit like a Bitcoin meetup, people getting together and having a drink and talking about big ideas that are maybe off topic in the mainstream. And it was interesting that you mentioned Czechoslovakia, because one thing that really stood out to me during my time in Prague was I happened upon one of many churches that was quite beautiful, and I went inside, and it was the Church of Saint Cyril and Methodius, which was a hiding place during World War II for the Czech resistance, who were fighting against the Nazi occupation of their country. And this kind of famous story of the parachutists who were trained in England, and they were dropped in with radios and guns back into Czechoslovakia to kind of fight and create a resistance movement. And this particular church was where they had their final stand against the Gestapo. And just the the stories, are really quite chilling and quite moving, that these young men, gave their lives for their country and for their brothers and sisters. And when I say country, I guess we're talking about a culture and a shared history that they were aligned with. It wasn't necessarily a nationalist thing. It was quite problematic in those times to identify a clear national boundaries, but certainly in terms of a shared history, a shared culture, that's what they were fighting for. And it was really quite moving to see that story and read about it. And as you describe, there is a gun to these people's head in terms of the Soviet example you gave. In 1968, the Prague Spring and the invasion and the occupation of Czechoslovakia. But I guess where we are today, and kind of couching this with maybe the perhaps on the surface more benign example of, say, New Zealand or Japan or any other sort of modern liberal democracy, where the gun isn't directly pointed at you, or is it? We have taxation, we have coercion still. What's your frame of discussion for kind of talking about where we're at in the world today? Because, we don't have the Soviet Union anymore. We don't have those clear and present ideological figures standing over us, but still there are these power structures that are coercing us and holding us back. So, how do you describe those firstly, and then how can we talk about those?
Well, a lot of these things are as they have been for a long time, right? Like, if you don't pay your taxes, IRS agents will show up very shortly. If you drive over a red light, you're going to have the cops coming after you very quick. If you drive your car without a license plate, right? If you don't have the driver license itself, try starting a business in the food production business. Just start cooking something and sell it to your friends, and very soon you'll realize that you're breaking like 1 million laws while doing that. And each one of these laws is the gun pointed at your face, right? So this is, of course, the one thing that that is very obvious, right? But then recently there's many more ways of coercion that is applied on top of that. First and foremost, the peer pressure, right? Like, again, do any morally righteous thing that is a human legalized crime, and others will spy on you, will snitch on you. I mean, think of the number of people who called the cops on their neighbors because they were visiting with 4 friends during the pandemic, right? Like, this was real, right? Like, snitches are real, and people are brainwashed enough to like seriously hurt their neighbors just because the authority told them to do so. So this is also, but again, this is nothing new. There's this one horrible story of the East Germany, where, again, half of the population was a spy and directly working for the government or something like this. Anyhow, so there was she wasn't even necessarily like a hardcore freedom fighter, right? She was just a little bit of a dissident, right? Not much, but eventually she got put into the gulag for having some bad ideas or whatnot. Years afterwards, she got released, and the Stasi falls, or all of that falls, and eventually the German government opens up the database of the surveillance of the Stasi. So she goes in and gets her file, which is this huge file, right, of all her personal information. And here she reads that she got the reason why she got thrown in jail was because of her husband snitching on her, telling to the authorities that she did something bad. And so her husband back then was snitching on her. To this day, she was living with and married to this husband. Right? So imagine that, right? Your life partner for many years at this point snitches on you, puts you in the gulag where you almost die of starvation and rape. Then you make it out of it, with your hooray courage. And you realize that same person who now welcomes you home with a smile, right, is the one who caused that harm to you to be done early on, right? Yeah. This is the level of insanity that people can go to when they are under the duress of authority.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I want to pull on, though, because, I mean, certainly from a New Zealand perspective, I often talk to people about these kinds of ideas. And as you could imagine, I mean, New Zealand has elements of deeply profound self-sovereignty and kind of do-it-yourself in our culture, but we also have a deep sense of the nanny state. and kind of big government. So we've kind of got these two competing things going on. And I talk to people about, something like tax, and I mean, you and I know, the answer to that tax doesn't do anything. It's theft, obviously. But there's a certain kind of discourse required, or a certain kind of way of talking about these things to kind of navigate people's pre-programming, I guess, or whatever it is. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at, because I do want to kind of get into some of the specifics around the second realm and how we can use it as a thought experiment for how Bitcoin circular economies and freedom orientated individuals can coexist and work together. But it's sort of, I think it's still at this point in the conversation, maybe it feels like it's kind of hard for people to kind of grasp on, that they pay taxes, and if they don't, then the man with the gun is going to come, and the IRS or the IRD, the tax people, are going to come and try and collect it, what is due to them. But at a higher sense, like, what is the philosophy or the paradigm that gives the state that monopoly on violence and that ability to coerce taxation? Like, what is it in the psyche that enables that to happen, do you think?
That's another really big question. And,
Sorry.
Ultimately, I think this is a form of mind control, right? And there is numerous techniques of doing that, right? That's what propaganda is about, or neurolinguistic programming. Just repeat a bold lie often enough, and eventually people will believe it's true. That's like roundabout a Goebbels quote. This, and then people are invested into ideas, right? It's not that people have ideas; it's that ideas have people, and people are really, really captured by ideas very often. I mean, just look at those Bitcoiners, right? We go crazy for this idea. Now, imagine, Ryan, someone would come tell you that, like, oh no, Bitcoin is actually a scam. Satoshi was actually the NSA. They have your full database. They got a copy of all your private keys. The whole system is rigged and messed up. Like, you would probably be very, very defensive and trying to rationalize your way against this, right? Because if it were true, you've spent the last 5-10 years of your life running in the wrong direction, right? Supporting the wrong system, making a colossal mistake, right? Like, just for, if Bitcoin fails, like, we're all going to be pretty depressed because like we're going to be wrecked, man. Right? We'll be wrecked, right? So, and Bitcoin is like this cute, funny internet money, right? Who cares? But imagine if not just your entire life, but the entire life of your mother, of your grandmother, of your grandmother, right? Each of their lives was spent running in the wrong direction, worshiping the wrong god, doing incredible harm. Like, again, like, by following orders, by adhering to authority, you are supporting and proliferating the theft. Right? This is bad karma being built up. And karma not just by you, but by generations in front of you. Right? There's this incredible load of evil actions that were done. And when you're the one of starting to realize, oh wait, taxation is actually theft. Wait a second. Now you just realize that this incredible doom is hanging above you, that humanity has made a grievous mistake, an unspeakable horror that has been made, not just for today, but for generations, for millennia. Imagine where humanity could have been if we would have got rid of slavery centuries ago, millennia ago, right? Where could we have been? It's incredible, right? The amount of harm and suffering done, it's unspeakable. And that is in the subconscious, I think, a substantial part of why people are so hesitant to really consider the truthfulness of these ideas. Because if these outrageous ideas, even a small part of them is actually true, then the shame and the evil of humanity of the last 100 years it's wow. Yeah. It's incomprehensible. And we were part of it. Yeah. You and I were part of it. We did it. We wanted it to be like that. Yeah. That hurts. That is a deep and profound hurt of, I guess, just failing humanity, failing the potential that we could have been.
Well, it's interesting because there's a certain institutional memory that sort of lingers perhaps much longer than the individual memory. And I think We can look at the project of New Zealand and its founding documents and the vision of New Zealand as a classless society, or the United States is a lot more well known. The founding fathers, the revolution against the monarchy in Britain, and the pushback against taxation without representation, etc. There was a lot of ideas being thrown around, but over time, the state is able to just keep on going, but the generations come and go. And so, in a sense, we're at this point now, many hundreds of years later, in the example of the United States, where, there's so much more tax being paid than ever before, yet nobody really cares. It's sort of like the frog being slowly boiled, right? And there's sort of every now and then there's people like you and I who sort of maybe talk about it and we do something about it. But the vast majority of people maybe don't materially conceptualize this thing. They don't see it. They're like fish in water. And to a degree, maybe we have a responsibility to our fellow man to kind of show the way, but you cannot coerce anyone to sort of take the way, as you know. And so it sort of becomes a case of education, perhaps, conversation. This is maybe where freedom of speech comes into it, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, this is such a high task for us to spread the word. Because what is the word that you're spreading? Let's say with Bitcoin, right? You want to tell your friends about Bitcoin. What are you actually telling them, right? Money is important. Your current form of money is inflating at a rapid rate, right? Which means every time you get paid, there's a bunch of people ahead of you who are stealing from you, right? That's they received the newly created money earlier. They're the winners, right? So you're a slave, right? You're being stolen from. But that's not where the fiat scam ends. Because you're going to spend this newly created money later into the cycle, right? So there's billion people who are coming after you in this line of money printing. Not just the people alive today, but their children and grandchildren are coming after you as well. So not just are you a slave, you're also the perpetrator, right? You're stealing from a bunch of other people. You're part in this enormous wealth transfer regime, right? And this is evil. What you're doing is bad. And it's not just hurting others, it's hurting you as well. And if you would stop doing this evil, you would be better off. And look, here's a monetary system without inflation, and where we actually can use a money, which is of course a useful tool, without being sucked into the scheme of theft. But again, that's such a huge point to tell someone. Your money's fucked, your institution is fucked, you are being stolen from. And we're like, hey, why don't you buy Bitcoin? Yeah, well, guess why not? Because getting your head around this is crazy.
Yeah, well, to sort of, add some details to that, something that's really, as I go on this journey, my understanding of the role of the state and its monopoly on violence, and that it's able to execute warfare and physical violence against people in a way that is supported by this mass theft via the taxation and the control of the state as an entity. And we have several ongoing conflicts at the moment, and I'm often dismayed that my home country, New Zealand, is participating financially in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I have friends on both sides of that conflict, very close friends, and I think they are being victims of a war that's been perpetrated by states against states, but the victims themselves are the people. And if my food that I buy in a supermarket has a GST, a VAT tax on top of it, it's, I can buy an apple and part of that's going to pay for missiles in this battle, and it's it's difficult to comprehend. Yeah.
Exactly. And you bring up this whole point. It's not just with the money, as I explained, it's with every tax situation, right? Yeah. It's with every government school that plants a new idea into your children, right? These are all points of coercion in this massive pyramid scheme. And so many of our actions are implicitly supporting it, right? We're giving our tacit consent to the system existing, right? The rulers would be nothing without the consent of the governed, right? There is no way that they can sustain this power when people opt out. The reason is, why don't people opt out? Because they don't understand, because they ignore it, they're confused and they're misled. Right? Yeah. There's so much distractions around nowadays that there's simply no time to sit and think about what is right and wrong, and what of your actions are right and wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, though, I mean, I've come, I guess, to realize, and this is something Orwell has written about, but you have the kind of mass of people, the proles as he describes them, but for the most part, most people are just going to follow along with what is happening, the current thing and the flows of society, and then you've got a smaller subset of people who maybe ask questions. And I don't quite know how that distribution is calculated. Is it a genetic thing? Is it, a random distribution? Who knows? But certainly there's people like you and I asking questions, right? And then there's other people who are not asking the question. And that's fine, because those people are, well, it's not fine, but, that's what they're doing. And, we can talk to them about it. But I guess in our situation, you and I having this conversation, until now, there's been ways to opt out, but some of them have been more difficult. But given this new technology, and in particular the emergence of digital technology, encryption and Bitcoin, this kind of second realm is kind of as a concept, kind of coming back to that, the kind of the speakeasy that you described earlier. How do we sort of situate this? Because I think the challenge for a lot of people is, Bitcoin adoption, right? How do you get it out there? How do you interface with the fiat rails? And that's where all of the issues are, as you know, Max, like getting on-ramps and off-ramps working. That's like the hardest part of it. Bitcoin itself is super sweet. It just works. But it's when you have to go and interface with that first realm where the vast majority of people are. So like, maybe how do we paint a picture for like how the second and first realm, how these two systems kind of meet? How do they interface?
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Cryptography is something special. The universe smiles on encryption, as Julian Assange would have said. Like encryption is possible, and it's like a mathematic reality, right? It's 1 + 1 = 2, right? Or in other words, if I encrypt a message to your public key and I generate the ciphertext, anyone who knows the ciphertext can do nothing with it unless he also knows the private key. And that is just, it doesn't matter how powerful he is. It doesn't matter if he has a gun to your hand, right? He cannot get this information unless he has the private key. That's a mathematical guarantee. That's how the universe works. And humans, we're so genius to discover this. Like, imagine we lived millennia, like thousands and thousands of years without understanding of this way the universe works. And then, 50, 70 years ago, we really discovered some groundbreaking things, right? Private public key encryption or cryptography, hashing algorithms, zero knowledge proofs, right? Distributed peer, and then we could actually build things with that, right? We had the first message encryption protocols. We had the first peer-to-peer communication protocols, right? We had the first secure databases, secure user accounts. Right? The entire internet, as we know it, all of this computer technology is only possible because we've understood and mastered the mathematics of the universe, which is represented in encryption. Mm-hmm. And this is foundational. This is so important because we have now a way to act where power is no longer meaningful, right? Where coercion is no longer possible. That is so substantial, right? Mm-hmm. If I encrypt a message, it's encrypted, right? And there's nothing that anyone can do, regardless of how many guns he has, regardless of how much money he prints, regardless of how many slaves he can muster up in an army. He will not be able to decrypt this message, right? And that is itself such a breathtaking thing. And now we've seen 30, 40 years later, after the cypherpunk experiment started, on how far this craziness can go.
Well, I think it's almost so, it's so profound. To really comprehend it, I think maybe I could recommend people sort of sit down and work through. I've been reading Crypto Sovereignty, Eric Kayson's work. Are you familiar with that book?
Yeah, it's excellent.
Yeah, and he does a really good job of, I guess, describing in an almost poetic sense this kind of story that we're describing. Because I think we can say, encryption, no matter how many soldiers and tanks and nuclear bombs you have, you can't break a single encrypted thing. I think the gravity of that doesn't really maybe stand out to people, or it requires, art and kind of beautiful language and kind of sort of a dressing to really present it for what it is, even though it is such a simple mathematical concept. It's almost like profound. It's sort of, like the invention of the question mark or the number zero or something. It's so silly and so simple when but it's sort of such a big idea, right? And what it means, though, as you say, is that it negates the primacy of physical violence, which, if you follow the sovereign individual's thesis around the logic of violence, it feels like maybe with this technology of encryption, you can have these things that live and they're protected in the second realm, this encrypted realm, and they cannot suffer the physical violence of the state. And maybe historically we had sort of proto examples of something like secret handshakes or rituals or things that sort of hid things away from prying eyes, but ultimately all of those things were sufferable to violence, right? You could always go in, and as I said before, with this church in Prague where they had this shootout, it wasn't a sacred place in that sense. They were able to desecrate it. And the thing with encryption and Bitcoin and the way all these things work is no matter how much you try, you can't desecrate them. They are mathematical truths. And so it requires necessarily a cooperative mindset, right? Because you need the other person to sign with their private key to send you the Bitcoin. And there's no other way of doing it. And if that person is anonymous or they have a multi-sig setup or they've got themselves in such a situation where it's not, you can't force them to sign, then there's no other way to sign unless they decide they want to help you. And it sort of comes back to that collaborative agora that we were talking about earlier, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a great paper, I think with 2 parts, by Rahim Taragezidov. Forget the last name, that wasn't correct, but something like this. Anyhow, it's about the praxeology of violence. And very, very interesting. So this is not about catalectics. Catalectics is about action that is voluntary, right? That is trade and such. But then there's also violence. But violence has a logic to it. Why do people steal? First, because they are in a state of uneasiness. They would like to have some problem solved that is currently bothering them, right? They're hungry, let's say. And then 2, they look and see that you have a stake, right? So you have something that they would like. And they think that they can take it from you, right, with rather little cost, so that they still have enough energy over to eat it. And then crucially, they think, they judge that after they steal from you and eat the meat, they are better off than they currently are, right? So there is a value judgment in every coercive trade, and there is an entrepreneurial process of ensuring that you are profitable. An unprofitable thief starves soon, and because he will, he just won't have enough capital to sustain his life if he continuously spends more money on stealing stuff rather than the loot that he actually takes. And so, and cypherpunks understood this as well. Cypherpunks had this beautiful idea. How about we use encryption, this unbreakable bulletproof system, to increase the cost of attack? Meaning that if someone would like to increase it, the cost just goes higher and higher and higher. While simultaneously, we decrease the cost of defense. So to use this defensive technology, you will have to spend less and less and less. The RSA encryption scheme is perfect for this, right? Let's say you can create a private public key pair and a signature scheme with like 16 bits, right? That's a rather short random number. And now, I don't know, it takes you 1 nanosecond to compute this, right? And then an outside observer who might want to brute force a signature, he will have to spend, 1 month of computing time in order to brute force that cryptography, right? With RSA encryption, you can actually brute force this. It just takes a lot of compute power, right? But then what happens if we increase the bit size of the private key from 16 to 256, right? All of a sudden, it might take you 3 nanoseconds to create a private key or a signature, right? Instead of 1. So it's like 3 times worse for you. But still, it's tiny. Who cares, right? But on the attacker side, instead of having to spend a month, now you have to spend 10,000 years of compute power, right? See how we've exponentially increased the cost of attack. And the cost of defense compared, like 10,000 years to 3 nanoseconds. Right? That's exponentially decreased cost of defense. And that asymmetry is why encryption works and why the cypherpunk strategy is so powerful.
Yes, it certainly is. It's very powerful, and it's a profound concept. And I think what I'm curious about is this, that these kind of borderlands, because you and I, we live in nation states. We have physical bodies that can be attacked, but we also have this technology that is in the second realm, and it's it's highly defendable. It's extremely strong and resistant to attack. And so my takeaway from reading the Second Realm article was that the authors end with a couple of kind of action points, and they sort of certainly come back to that idea of action that we talked about with agorism. And so in terms of like running Bitcoin circular economies, trading, sharing ideas, how do we get specific about some of this stuff, Max? Because I think there is Bitcoin circular economies, there's merchants who accept Bitcoin, there's more and more of this stuff taking off, there's Bitcoin meetups happening everywhere, yet it's still, most people aren't doing that. As we said before, most people are just doing whatever, they're not part of this thing. How would you describe or paint a picture of those activities that actually enable us to develop the second realm further?
Yeah, so that's a great point, right? So that we have a second realm, and it's peaceful, right? The first realm is full of coercion, so naturally you would want to spend more time in the second realm, right, rather than the first, because you live freer. The problem though is the first realm fiat economy has 6 billion slaves at its disposal, right? Maybe a bit more that do a lot of work, right? They produce a bunch of stuff. They produce microphones, televisions, cars, fuel, right? The first realm economy is massive in scale because they have a huge amount of people, and that allows them to do division of labor and accumulate capital and get to economies of scale, right? The freedom realm, let's be a bit pessimistic, but 100,000 people, maybe 1 million, right, of really dedicated people who work only in the free voluntary society. And it's not many. These are obviously much smaller group of people, and therefore don't have as much division of labor, right? And they also have problems of being under active duress, right? Because the slave masters are looking for them, and if they find them, they will go to the gulag. So you need to take care of your OPSEC, and you cannot just broadcast and advertise all of your stuff online as well. And so these are all issues. That means that the first realm is currently, and probably for a long time to come, out-competing the second realm in terms of production. They're just producing way more than we are. And the problem is, even us in the second realm, we would like to have that fancy new iPhone, right? Because it's a great product, right? I wish that we could produce something like an iPhone in the second realm, but currently we can't. We're way far not there, right? In terms of scale to justify the creation of such a product. And then, so people from the second realm oftentimes go to the first realm in order to acquire stuff, right? Or to just, again, be part of the Communist Party and save your face. So it's not that people are exclusively always in the second realm or always in the first realm. There are those that wander in between the realms. And this is very often a useful strategy because the two realms have different benefits, right? And different downsides. And there's no problem with going in between the two. It's just that, of course, there's the risk of whenever you move from the first realm to the second realm that you bring the Goonies with you, and all of a sudden the second realm comes under attack because you leak the location of it as one example. But then there are also, this is a great business model, by the way, to be a proxy merchant to provide first realm services to second realm participants, right? And this is these are all possible and useful ways of living in the system right now.
I think it's naive to perhaps think, though, that the Bitcoin is going to just roll out to the people. We hyper Bitcoinize and everyone gets their wallet, and they're good to go. I mean, it's pretty clear that isn't a reality for most people who are in this system, right? It is a very opt-in system. You have to choose to want to do it, and so by nature, there's going to be people who come much later or they never come at all. And I think what you said really stands out to me, that, we don't really have a productive base. At the Prague conference that we went to, there's some mining machines, there's some different things for sale, but most of those are living within a supply chain and an economic system that has their vendors that are being paid in fiat. The upstream and the downstream of a lot of these businesses is all fiat. And so in terms of a autocratic state, a sort of a virtual state that is on a Bitcoin standard, there's very, very few people who are currently able to do that. And that's sort of been pointed out as a real issue, right? But I think maybe there's this role of trade with the first realm. And so that's where maybe we can start contextualizing kind of what this second realm looks like, because it's not a physical thing that you can go to. It sort of sits on top of the first realm in a virtual layer, right? And so you've got Bitcoiners all over the world who are kind of, as you say, wandering between the two. Maybe they work a fiat job, but they're also doing Bitcoin stuff. And I wonder whether eventually we start seeing it emerge a bit like a nation state, where those people more and more are able to demand payment in Bitcoin, or they're able to build businesses that demand Bitcoin for their product that they're building. Is that how Bitcoin starts entering into an economic reality in terms of goods and services, potentially?
Yeah, definitely. Right. The more people accept Bitcoin directly for goods and services, are like definitely supporting the overall mission. But also recognize that just because you use Bitcoin as payment doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of the first realm. And you can still be coerced to pay a bunch of taxes or have licenses, etc. And a lot of first realm companies and businesses use Bitcoin as payments as well. And so the two are not necessarily like clearly in, like, Bitcoin cannot only be used in the second realm, right? And however, another point to realize is that, and this is great in the book, The Second Realm, that without a secure meat space, we have no secure cyberspace. If you have, like, you sit in front of your laptop and you want to, create a new Bitcoin wallet, what do? You write down your 12 words, right? Or at least you show them on the screen or something like this. Well, what if there is a surveillance camera right behind you, right, filming you as you see those 12 words? The encryption is gone, right? Because you have shared your private key, and now others can encrypt and decrypt your messages or sign your messages on your behalf, and of course spend your Bitcoin. And so in order to do anything in cyberspace, we need to have a physical meat space reality, because cyberspace is ultimately run on computer hardware, right? And that hardware is under the threat of being coerced by the current nation state schemes, right? Or other mafia organizations. And so if we don't have a secure meat space, again, we cannot have a secure cyberspace. Now, right now, we're kind of in this like Goldilocks grace period, where nobody is like really hardcore surveilling the meat space in order to get to your Bitcoin, but they could very much. And if they would start doing so, that's a serious problem that today we are not at all equipped to. Like, Bitcoin entirely breaks with a small army of a couple billion drones, right? Because we just find all of the private keys and take them. This is a serious issue. And this is what Second Realm highlights, that we need to protect our meat space environment. We need to ensure that we have pockets of liberty in meat space, right? Where we have perimeters and lines of defense and early notifications of intruders, right? And then men who actually stand their ground against intruders and ensure that they do not proceed faster, right? This is essentially important if we want to have any security in cyberspace in the long run. Right? Now, how do we get this physical security? That's a really tricky question. And we can, of course, do it in the, let's say, official way, right? And I go to a nation state like El Salvador and say that, yeah, like, please give us this protected zone here where we can keep our Bitcoin safe, right? I'm not so sure if that will work, because you're kind of telling the entire world, hey, look, this is where we are. I really like the strategy of the Second Realm that, first of all, like, be private and quiet about it. Don't tell people that you're setting up a base here, right? And then keep everything movable, right? Keep in such a way that when you detect an attack, right, and you have your first lines of defense that somehow deter this attack for at least a while, that should give you enough time to take all of your capital and move away. Right? When you're in direct conflict with the state, de-escalation is likely your best path forward, because the state can outprint you and outgun you, and they will just annihilate you. So instead, pack up and leave. Take everything you have with you. Right? And then it makes sense to build in a modular architecture that you can just pack up. That's why shipping containers are so great for dwelling places, because you can get a shipping container out of a place in, 30 minutes if you have the right gear, or a day if you need to order the gear. Right? Everything is optimized for moving shipping containers. And so to have, let's say, a private base with a secure perimeter and professional personnel to protect this space, while already having a backup location and travel in between the compromised location and the backup location is already set up. Then as soon as you hear an attack coming, you de-escalate and you evacuate, you take all your stuff and you continue being productive on another place that it does welcome you and does not actively attack you in a hostile manner.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's, I think, a whole school of thought and perhaps underutilized body of knowledge around how to organize such things. And I'm reminded of in New Zealand several years ago, there was an occupation of Parliament in response to the COVID lockdowns and the vaccine mandates, as you may be aware, sort of inspired by the convoy movement in Canada, if you remember that period of time. And what stood out to me, Max, was just the sheer professionalism of the organisation of the protest, which lasted for 23 days, occupied the New Zealand Parliament. It was really quite a miraculous sort of town emerged on the grass outside of Parliament. You had kitchens within several days. You had plumbing and toilets and showers hooked up.
Excellent.
In this place. And that stood out to me, the role of communications, having walkie-talkies, messaging apps and things like that, which could be used to coordinate people. It was really quite a masterclass. And then the other one that stands out is during the Hong Kong protests of 2019, where you had, medical personnel and, sort of designated people for certain things. When the tear gas came, they would be the ones who go and snuff it out and these kinds of things, organized and very highly dynamic, sort of as soon as the police came, the groups were able to disperse and go somewhere else. And I've been just reading a book about that. It's called City on Fire that my friend wrote. And it sort of just details some of these things. But I guess when the push comes to shove though, Max, and this is something I often think about, in both of those situations, New Zealand and Hong Kong, it was the police who had the lethal weapons. It was the police who had the ability to shoot, to kill, to do such things. And there were cases in Hong Kong in particular where they were brutally maimed by the police. And we come back to this idea of well, how do you deal with that? Because, you have obviously a non-aggression principle. You have kind of peaceful protest as a historical movement, when faced with the state. But I mean, how would you just couch sort of, the kind of the violence side of this thing? Like, how do you fight the state in that sense?
Well, non-aggression is not the same as pacifism, right? Non-aggression means that if someone initiates violence against you, then you have every right to put an end to that violence, and including using force, including deadly force, right? Now, just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean that it's a wise strategy. Forgiveness is oftentimes a more suitable strategy, and well, especially if you're fighting the guy with the money printer and the mind control apparatus to again bring millions of people into movement, probably de-escalation is wiser than standing your ground. Now, again, it depends so much on the situation, but let's say you have a superb physical location and huge amount of capital spent on defense of this, a bunch of dedicated men working on protecting the place. You have the public behind you because you made some memes or whatnot. Like, sure, you can probably fight it out, but you still might lose a bunch of your men who just get shot. You will lose a bunch of your capital because it gets blown up by bombs, and you will lose a bunch of time. Right? And that time means that you cannot be productive in other ways, right? That not just do we destroy actively stuff in this war zone, but we also have the opportunity cost that we're not building up the next place already. So I think that in very few cases does it actually really make sense to fight it out against a much larger adversary like the state. And again, I mean, fight out in the sense of a street fight, like direct bullets flying, bloody competition. That is very costly.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I learned as well, though, because, I mean, it should be noted that, I mean, the protest that I described in New Zealand, it was shut down very violently by the police in the end, and a lot of people were hurt. It was, in the media, it was promoted a certain way as this kind of radical project that was finally got put to rest by the brave police officers. There was a certain spin to it. So, I mean, in a sense, it achieved the outcomes that it was after, which was a change in the COVID policy. But in terms of the project itself and the protest, I mean, it was snuffed out, right? And so it makes me think, as you said before, kind of keeping a low profile, not resorting to that kind of the street as the domain at which we have this battle, right? Because you can never win, really. Like, there's always another person ready to put on the helmet and pick up the baton and enforce the physical violence of the state.
Yeah.
And
ultimately, I think that this marching and protesting, it's just a form of politicking, right? You're making a scene to convince politicians to change the rules in some favor. You might as well run for parliament yourself and do it yourself, right? But there's a reason why this doesn't work, right? Because you're trying to reform a system of slavery to be more kind. That's not how the whole thing works, right? That's not the point of it. And so I'm just not at all a believer or hoper in reformism. I think we need to address the problem at its root cause, and that is consent. If you cannot reform a consentless system, there's not such a thing. So opting out and building something else, in my opinion, is a way more suitable strategy. Because sure, initially, we might walk in between the first and second realm quite frequently. But you don't really have to. If at some point, you can live your life fully in the second realm and be happy there. And then voila, why do you need to reform the first realm? We don't need to brainwash others. We don't need to influence others and change their ideas or to change their mind to love our ideas instead. No, we can just ignore them. Let them do their thing, and we might give them the advice that it looks most likely that you're running off a cliff. But are we going to stand in the way of them so that they run us over and drag us down the cliff as well? No.
Well, I think that sort of stands out to me maybe as a real, again, sort of simple idea that's maybe hard for people to really comprehend. But yeah, effectively, as you say, opting out and unsubscribing, upon which right is the government and the state given to levy a tax against you? There's a sort of philosophical history to that question. You can go back to the various arguments around it and sort of the social contract and things like this. But it's arguable that in the case of New Zealand, the social contract, if it was even relevant, was broken. And so now, we're over. That relationship has ended. And so you just opt out. And I think maybe there's more, perhaps, future discussions and articles to be written about what that means, because it's such a simple thing to say, but, what does it mean to opt out? But yeah, I mean, that's certainly the straightforward and direct approach, is to just stop giving it any attention and you become free.
And for example, look at Ron Paul, right? And the Fed, or even audit the Fed, right? Is the only reasonable thing to do, right? At least to audit it and be a bit more public about what's going on. But how long has he been haunting that horn?
He's an old man. It's never going to happen.
Years?
It's never going to happen.
Right? So he tried for basically his entire lifetime to politic and to influence the system from within. And his greatest achievement was getting a bunch of new people involved in thinking about these ideas. But in terms of actually moving the needle on auditing the Fed or reining in government power, look at where the government was 40 years ago and where it is now. Obviously, it got way worse. Right?
Yeah.
So all for the claimed achievement or goal of trying to change the system from within, there could not have been a greater failure than Ron Paul. And you're probably not going to do a better job than Ron Paul either, because he was fucking great. But he achieved nothing, right? And now consider that to the likes of Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Satoshi Nakamoto, right? Like we have BitTorrent, we have Bitcoin, right? Just because a couple crazy guys did it, and now they opted out, and millions, hundreds of millions of other people are opting out now. Like, what has had objectively a more impressive outcome, right? The politicking of Ron Paul or the cypherpunks write code of Satoshi?
Yeah, that's profound, man. I mean, I think that's what's really standing out to me, is that it's right there. You know, Bitcoin is, I don't know if it's, how would you describe it? It's the pathway, you know, to opting out. It is the way, you know, you buy your first Bitcoin, you get your first Bitcoin, you get a little bit of freedom. More Bitcoin, more freedom. More encryption, more freedom. It's sort of, it's not necessarily a binary. I mean, but like, I guess coming back to this idea of opting out, like how do you do it? Sorry, like, tell me more. Sorry.
There is a real, no, it's yet another great question that makes me think. And probably the practical philosophy of how to opt out that I found was that of VONU, voluntary, not vulnerable. It's also like 1970s or so, where this was described by an anonymous writer called Rayo. And he's basically laying out that you want to live a peaceful life, so it would be useful to have a metric of success. The metric of success, he discovered, is the mean time to harassment. Right? What is the average length of time in between the coercive events? Right? Or in other words, when was the last time you were stolen from? Right? And the longer this number, the higher this number, the better. Right? And that's an actionable metric of success. Right? Increase the duration since in between you were harassed, and you're freer. Right? Now, one like good way of doing this is like, are you still holding fiat money? Right? If yes, your last time that you were stolen from was like half a millisecond ago, because you're being stolen from all the time. Right? So if you're using fiat money, your mean time to harassment is zero, because you get stolen from all the time. Right? So first, decrease your fiat stash, like substantially. Right? The second, for example, is your bank account. Right? Whenever you have to ask for permission of something, are you really like free, or are you living at the threat of coercion that one entity can just deny you the request? Right? That is coercion as well, right? That is the attempt of like, or the threat of force, right? The anticipation of violence. You have that every time you interact with your bank, right? And it might not even be conscious, but it's certainly subconscious, that you're like praying to the bankers to please don't take my account, right? Whenever you press login, like, oh, I hope it's still working. That is, of course, whenever you pay taxes, right? Yeah. So usually mean time to harassment is, again, like there's income tax once a year, but like value-added tax, like the last time you bought bubblegum, you paid 20% of tax on that as well, right? When was the last time you were sitting in a car that had a license plate? Right? Oh, that's another thing that you have to ask for from the state. Or when was the last time you actually were driving with a driver license? Right? Or when was the last time you got pulled out by a cop and you had to show your driver license? These are all moments of coercion that we have in our everyday life. And if you're honest with yourself and you see how much coercion is happening, and then you want to be consistent and say, no, that does require substantial changes to your life. And so Rayo, this character, went through a couple journeys. First, he started with van nomadism. And so he sold his apartment, where you have to pay tax on, right? And you can just save a bunch of money with living out of a car. You can park it on public roads, right? You can even remove the license plate and just drive in the woods and nobody cares, right? These are certainly a much more VONU lifestyle, a much freer lifestyle than being in a city apartment, right? VONUism in the city is still possible. You can live certainly a free life in the city, but it's much easier to do that on the road, for example, in a truck. But then Rayo realized that, well, actually, even when I have this vehicle, I still have to pay tax every year. if I don't renew my driver license or the license plate, I'm going to get kidnapped as well. So this is not a free lifestyle either. And then he went into the bush and did wilderness Wanu, and where he was in some huge national park and just was not seen by humans for many years. And he was just out and about, and probably in some of his letters, he was like saying that he anticipates his mean time to harassment to be about like 15 to 20 years now. And like in the dense definition of like showing a license plate is a coercive act, right? And he could be in many, many years. But he also realized that the amount of production that you do has an inverse effect on the amount of Wanu that you can express. Like you living alone and just cooking yourself a little food, that's the tiniest production facility, and you can hide that wherever. But if you have a family, right, that gets a lot more difficult. Or if you have a business where you produce things and you have like 20 workers, to keep such an establishment free from coercion is way more difficult than to do it at a smaller scale. So there were quite a lot of pessimistic realizations with this guy as well, that if you actually and consistently want to live free, it's going to be very expensive. You're going to have to, say no to a lot of things. You have to get rid of opportunities that you would otherwise have had, and arguably live a life much closer to the level of subsistence. And that's the sad thing, that humanity is in a state where if you want to live free, you're basically alone, right? And if you're alone, you're not going to be productive at all because you don't have division of labor and such. And this is, again, yet another point of the tragedy of the low morals of humanity at this current moment, that those who do want to live free are utterly alone.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I wonder, I can appreciate there's some connections here around sort of lone wanderer state of being connected with the idea of the state, and how, there's sort of a historical project where that has kind of coalesced into tribes and sort of civilizations and things. But I wonder whether, we're in a new place now where with Bitcoin, perhaps, you cannot reduce your mean time to harassment to zero, but you can kind of outflank it in a way. It's sort of like, you described Ron Paul, he never got anything done, really. He wasted his life on it, arguably. But, there was a political inflation that kind of outpaced his political good works. But with Bitcoin, you can take pot shots at the political system. You can also be productive. We've got a lot of very freedom-minded people who are building Bitcoin businesses. They're actually very financially successful. And they kind of, once they have that economic power, they start having something to work with. There's a sort of hegemony there. Like, if you don't have an economic system or power, you really don't have anything. You are quite vulnerable, as you described. But if you've got Bitcoin, you can kind of be like, well, fuck you, I'm going to buy some stuff, And so I think maybe for, sort of future discussions, perhaps, Max, we could kind of go into that. But I think maybe there's something there where Bitcoin is this new thing that can kind of activate this idea that's been around for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rayo, the guy who invented Wanu, he was also a pioneer cypherpunk. But like in the 1970s, he was talking about like encrypted radio communications and mesh networks and like stuff like this. Like he was crazy, crazy visionary. I'd be very curious if any of the cypherpunks have ever like actively heard of Wanu back then. Because cypherpunks definitely knew of Rothbard and Samuel Edward Konkin III with agorism. And Rayo with Wanu was like the third strategy that I know of roughly this time, but by far the least well known. But it's very, very applicable to the cypherpunk specifically, because Rayo was a privacy freak. Like, yeah, we don't even know his real name, I think, to this day.
Yeah, I think it's all incredible stuff, and I think it's important, this work which lives in the historical record, that we talk about it and we discuss it. And I mean, this is again that role of the humble Bitcoin meetup, or the drinks on a Friday night with friends, and having this discussion and being able to play with ideas, being able to take the other side, steelman the other side of the argument, and kind of talk about these things, right? Because these are ideas. They have a physical action to them as well, but they're also concepts. They can be tweaked and discussed and critiqued. And I think that's quite an important thing. We don't want to go as far as maybe you described the universities of Vienna kind of making any untruth into a truth, but I think genuine Socratic inquiry into the nature of things and truth is it's an honourable thing to undertake, and it's perhaps not done as much as we should.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing, that truth is just in and of itself stable, and chaos is not, or falsehood is not. So I think we're fighting in a downhill battle. We're on the winning side of the momentum.
We've got mathematics on our side.
Exactly.
And as you may know, Plato often talks about that as the highest form of truth or goodness, in a sense, was the mathematical reality, the mathematical truth. But look, Max, I'm conscious of time, and I do appreciate you coming with me on this journey deep into the rabbit hole of the second realm and sharing what you know about this. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or anything else you'd like to share at this stage?
Yeah, thanks, Cody, for the invite. Really enjoyed this conversation as well. And I guess specifically, if you're interested more in the second realm, there used to be a website called anarplex.net, which was hosted by early cypherpunks who worked on a bunch of amazing things: anonymous remailers, VPNs, anonymous marketplaces, eCash, digital currencies, etc. And this website unfortunately went down as the company behind it also went bankrupt, or not bankrupt, but they closed it. Crypto Hippie, by the way. Crypto Hippie was one of the best, if not the best, VPN services ever. Unfortunately, they were shut down because too much pressure from the dark matrix. And nevertheless, the website is still up and running on an archive. So anarplex.syrian.io/files. Here you have probably around 30 very beautiful cypherpunk writings that I can, all of them, very much recommend. Maybe most notably, A Lodging of Wayfaring Men by Paul Rosenberg is a fictional novel which is based on the kernel of truth, and it tells of the first cypherpunk project that wanted to create an anonymous marketplace around 1997 to 2001 or 2. Incredibly fascinating story. Very, very beautiful. Also great to orange pill friends, or to, because it kind of guides a couple people through discovering liberty and individualism. So that's a very interesting book. This book then inspired The Second Realm, which we talked about later. And then after The Second Realm came a bunch of other things. There's, for example, #Agora, another story of agorist cypherpunks building cool shit in Berlin. There is, for example, the Declaration of Separation, building on top of the Declaration of Independence, or the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, or the Crypto-Anarchist Manifesto. Same type of vibe, but just way better than all of those combined. So the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Separation is the name of it, talking about opt-out. This is the opt-out manifesto. It's wild. It's so good. What else is a good one? Alongside Night. Yes, definitely read this one. Another fiction piece, also like in the 80s or something. But it's beautiful. It has like this underground economy where people are building anonymous tools and working on just selling stuff. And here's this concept there. One of their huge citadels, basically, gets attacked, but they have an evacuation protocol and get everyone to the second facility that's already been in production for years, right? So very fascinating book on strategy. Anything that's on Anarplex, basically. There's a couple more. Just go through all of it. It's insanely great cypherpunk writings. Yeah,
it's a great resource, and that's where I found, just through a web archive, I found the copy of The Second Realm from Anarplex. But if people want to follow you personally, Max, where are you most active these days online?
Definitely on Nostr. Not even that much there, but much more than anywhere else. So max@towardsliberty.com. You can find my NPub. towardsliberty.com. Again, check the Wayback Machine archive for a bunch of old references, and stay tuned for a new redesign of that website as well.
Yeah, awesome. Well, hey, look, Max, I really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge and insight on this topic. And yeah, I hope we can catch up again, either in real life or for another episode one day in the future.
For sure. Yeah, thanks again, Cody, for the invite, and keep it up. It's always good to have more podcasts and spreading more of these good words. So thanks a lot.
Cool. Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Ellingham, and that was the Transformation of Value podcast. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.